Welcome to the Independent School Podcast with me, Juliet Corbett. As an executive coach and strategy advisor, I guide senior leaders in the world of education to find their strategic focus, empower their teams, and regain control over their time, helping them go from exhausted to strategic. On this podcast, I share the ideas and tips that I've developed over the years to help the leaders that I've worked with one-to-one, so I can help you to focus on your priorities and achieve your goals with confidence and ease. And this week we're continuing our conversation about overwhelm. Those of you who have listened to last week's episode will remember that I talked about the 3 steps that I go through to try and overcome the feeling of being overwhelmed, which feels to me like there's too much to do and I'm really worried, increasingly feeling worried that I'm not going to get it all done. And that just leads me to be less effective in terms of trying to get it all done, which leads to an unhelpful cycle of feeling overwhelmed. And what I talked about last week was that if I can firstly do something that gets me out of my head, which normally involves going out into the garden or going for a walk or talking to a friend, something to just create a break between me and my work, then prioritize all of the projects and tasks I've got in front of me, and then finally develop the discipline and the tactics to really focus on doing one thing at a time and having the confidence to not worry about all of the other things that are on my plate while I'm trying to achieve each thing that's in front of me. Now, I invited you to have a go at this last week and to let me know if it worked for you. I have no kind of grandiose assumptions that what works for me will work for you. It might help to give you some insights into things that will work for you. It might not. And that's fine as well. But this week, I want to talk about the same feeling, that feeling of being overwhelmed, having too much to do and not having the confidence that you're going to get it done in time. I'm going to share a slightly different perspective, and that is being able to distinguish between overwhelm and overload. Now, this is something that I discovered for myself back in lockdown, in the COVID lockdown. And it was the first lockdown that I found most challenging, trying to juggle work at home alongside having kids at home as well. I found it really quite difficult. And what I realised, actually with the help of my coach at the time, what I realised was that I am a naturally optimistic person who's quite confident about getting things done. What this leads to is consistently being way too overly optimistic about how much I can do in a particular time frame. So I would set myself things that I wanted to achieve by certain dates and have my to-do list and all the rest of it. And then when I didn't achieve those things in time, I'd get really down on myself about the fact that I didn't do it all. It's really annoying. I didn't get around to doing all this stuff that I'd set for myself. And then I'd work late into the evenings to get it all done, getting progressively more tired and fatigued. And of course, then we don't work at our best capacity, which means that we don't get as much done the following day. And sometimes this was me wanting to keep promises to myself. And sometimes it was me keeping promises to clients where I'd made a promise as to what I was going to deliver and by when. But even that was overly optimistic about how much I could get done at any one time. Now, I felt this as overwhelm. I felt this as I've got so much to do and I'm really worried I'm not going to get it done in time. And my response to that was, okay, you need to work harder. You need to work more efficiently. You need to make sure that you're, really working effectively to get it all done. You should be able to do it, Juliet. You should be able to do it. Quite strict with myself. What I realised, though, was however much discipline I had to focus on one thing at a time, however much I'd prioritise, however much I'd managed to take a break, all of those steps I talked about last week didn't make the slightest bit of difference. What I realised was that I was overloaded. I wasn't actually overwhelmed. Now, I figured out back during lockdown that the technique of being able to measure how much time it took to actually undertake certain tasks consistently. So I kind of time tracked for a couple of months. Understanding how long things were going to take me then allowed me to see with blinding clarity, oh my goodness, of course I'm not getting all this stuff done. It would be impossible for me to get all this done because I'm just massively over optimistic about how much I can do in a working week. Massive insight. Completely changed the way that I do things. And although I have to admit, hasn't fully meant that I never feel overwhelmed, it's been a big step forward to making me feel much more in control of not having that sensation of overwhelm and knowing what to do when I do feel it. Much, much later, and I think this was about a couple of months ago, I'm going to put a link to it in the episode notes. I listened to a podcast episode by an author called Cal Newport. He has a podcast called Deep Questions. He wrote the book Deep Work, which is an amazing book, highly recommended. And he makes the distinction between overwhelm and overload. And what I realised was that this much more succinctly, with much more clarity, explained what I had discovered for myself a few years previously. So this is what I'm going to share with you today. Okay, so the way that Cal Newport thinks about it, and I have to admit that I may have put my own spin on some of these definitions I'm going to share with you. They may not be word for word from him. So he talks about overwhelm as being feeling that you have too much to do. That feeling, which is a very uncomfortable feeling of too much to do, I can't get it done, I feel overwhelmed, then feeds into inefficient work habits. So procrastination, an inability to focus, switching tasks too frequently because you've got so much on your plate. Those inefficient work habits then mean that you get less done than you could do, which then acts as a feedback loop into the feeling that you have too much to do and not enough time to get it all done. So this unhelpful feedback loop is really based on the feeling that you have feeding into inefficient work habits. Now, if you're genuinely overwhelmed, then the basis for the solution, obviously the individual solution will be unique to you, but the basis of the solution is going to be, okay, we need to find some work habits that will enable you to work more efficiently. We need to build the confidence over time that those work habits will enable you to get your work done so that we can break that feedback loop, break that feeling of constant worry about how much you've got to do, because you feel confident, you've got systems, processes, habits that enable you to work more efficiently. So that's overwhelm. That's why the steps I talked about last week might be helpful in taking a break, prioritizing what you need to do, and then working one thing at a time, and then getting everything done because you're working more efficiently to get those things done. In complete contrast, Cal Newport talks about overload. Now, overload can feel very, very similar to overwhelm, but it's a different process. Overload is when you actually have too much to do, and it is impossible to get it all done, regardless of how efficient you are. And yet, you beat yourself up, you think about the fact that, oh, if only I could work more efficiently, if only I had better work habits, if only I had a better time management system, then I could get it all done and everything would be fine. But in actual fact, you've got too much to do. There's no way you're going to break that feedback loop just by working more efficiently. And in fact, if you just keep trying to build up the efficiency, you're almost treating yourself like a robot and you're not giving yourself those breaks and the capability to work at your peak performance. Now, if you're actually overloaded, the solution is completely different. The solution is prioritizing much more courageously, much more ruthlessly, boldly, really analysing what are the priorities that you can deliver, how much is it possible to deliver in the time that you have, the working time that you have, and then telling people and being really clear about your rationale as to why it's not possible to do all the things that are on your plate within the amount of time that you have. Now, this is not to say that you can then get away with some lazy work habits. You still need to make sure you've got those efficient work habits. So you're building that ability to be really disciplined, to be really focused, to have the ability to work deeply on one thing at a time and have really remarkable results from the time that you put into that work. And then batching together at other times where you just deal with lots and lots of shallow things, lots of replying to email and getting things done that obviously you can't avoid doing, but aren't going to dramatically move things forward in terms of delivering the strategic priorities that you have. So the solution is different. If you're overloaded, it's about really courageous prioritization and then that combining that with work efficient habits. If the problem is overwhelm, it's all about finding the habits that are going to help you to work more efficiently. Now, when I heard Cal Newport talk about this, it made so much sense. Oh my goodness, it made so much sense. And one of the things that I notice is that when I work with people one-to-one, and they could be heads in other senior leadership roles, I work with fundraising teams, when I really break down what is it that you're prioritizing, and then people tell me the 20 things that they're prioritizing, that's a signal that probably they're overloaded, not overwhelmed. And when it's really hard for them to then say, oh, okay, right, now you're asking me for real priorities, as in what are the things that I'm working on this month? Let's say, oh yes, okay, well that's easy for me to reel off the top 3 that are clearly important. If that process is really hard and you genuinely really don't know what your top 3 priorities are this month or this week or this day, if that's not clear to you, that's a signal that potentially you're suffering from overload, not overwhelm, because you've just got too many priorities, trying to juggle too much, feeling like if only I could be better at this, I could do all of this, and in actual fact, possibly there's just too much on your plate. Now, it's really a couple of really key points that I just want to make here. The first is, when I say efficient work habits, I do not mean assuming you're a robot trying to work with super efficiency, where every moment is optimized to have the perfect strategic result and everything's very planned in advance. There's no opportunity to take a break just because you feel like you need a break. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about efficiency from the point of view of figuring out how you, as a human being with biological needs, which includes rest and restore time, how you work best to harness your peak performance for the activities that matter the most and in the moments that matter the most. Normally, there are particular things and particular moments in time during a working week where you working at your peak performance is going to really make a difference. We need to build in habit to make sure that you are able to just draw on that peak performance habit at the particular moment when it matters. And that generally means sometimes easing off on some things, but not getting too lazy, not slacking either. There's a balance to be had there. The other key point I want to make is that when you're thinking about overload in particular, it differs slightly depending on the kind of team environment that you're working with. So if you are leading a team, or indeed leading a school as head, your feeling of overload may be rooted in what you are trying to achieve this week, and or may be rooted in what you as a whole school or you as a whole team are trying to achieve. So that overload may actually be something that you're experiencing or that extends beyond just you. And so there, what's really helpful is talking to other people about how long things take them. And although tracking your time is the most boring thing in the world, I mean, there are apps that are out there that enable you to do it. Personally, I've not found an app that I really like. I do it by retrospectively marking in my diary what I spend time on and then going back and reviewing it. There are much more tech-savvy solutions out there that you could use. As unexciting as that sounds, that's probably the first step to understanding if there is an overload issue. Is really genuinely understanding how long it takes to do things, then plotting out everything on your to-do list. If you were to add the amount of time that's needed, an accurate amount of time that's needed, add it up, think about how many hours you're able to work this week. Does that look feasible or not? That kind of data-driven way of thinking about it sounds a bit boring, but it's probably the first way to really address this issue. Okay, I'm going to leave you with that thought. I would love to hear your feedback on this. I really want to understand to what extent these particular solutions are helping people. I know that these are the sorts of frameworks that have helped me. I know that in my one-to-one conversations with multiple people, it's helped them, but I have yet to test this at scale. So I would love to hear your feedback on whether these ideas resonate with you, whether they're helpful. Fantastic. I'm going to leave you at this point. Have a strategic week. Do reach out to me if I can do anything to help you or your team in the meantime. And don't forget that if we're going to be thinking strategically, We all need to build in the space to breathe, the time to learn, and the courage to adapt. Have a great week. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.